Guys, welcome back to another episode of A to the Show. Just before we get into it, please, for the love of God, subscribe, like, and share so that we can share more of our episodes with people and that our guests also get more recognition for their work. Uh, that's all I have to say. Come on, Ali, let's go.
All right. Welcome Carlos Pérez Osorio, an acclaimed Mexican director, producer, and photographer based in Mexico City with a strong background in broadcast media, passion for documentary filmmaking. He's the founder of production house Scopio, and Carlos has directed and produced powerful stories across Latin America and the Middle East for platforms like Netflix, Discovery Channel, Intercept, United Nations, UNRWA, UNICEF, etc. His work includes the Emmy-nominated Caravanas, Three Deaths of Marisela Escobedo, the Taco Chronicles, and most recently Los Tigres del Norte. Thank you so much for coming on, Carlos. Very exciting to have you.
No, thank you
Perfect.
guys.
All right,
Uh,
let's jump right into it. We were watching your
exactly.
documentaries.
Yeah, actually, I just finished Les Tigres del Norte. And it was such an interesting documentary for me because, like, I really like how you captured this whole story of how a family, built themselves up in the music industry from literally nothing. They just came from a farm,
Yeah,
and their parents weren't able to support them at some point because their dad, got shot and he was paralyzed. And the boys just rallied themselves up to start playing music to kind of support the family. And then they ended up doing it, and are still doing it for the past 5 decades. And it's just crazy how, a family can just rally themselves up and do something like this and become one of the best Spanish bands in the world. Uh,
yeah.
I guess my question in all of this is like, first of all, how do you even get in touch with them? You know, how do you get in contact with these big names?
So I was very lucky because when I put out my first documentary, The Three Deaths of Marisela Escobedo, a
Mhm.
producer who's now today he's my business partner watched it and just called me and said, "Hey, like I have this project." He's been trying to put a project with the Tigres for like 5 years before,
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
he was not getting it right because of many things, and also because it's hard, to deal with such household names, like such a big
Yeah.
band, and
Yeah.
and these guys are, I mean, we're really good friends now. Like I love Los Tigres and their families. These guys are from another generation, right? So,
Mhm.
and they grew up with some values that have has keep them together, in the midst of all of
Hmm.
the things that revolve that kind of music, like there's a lot of, narcos and stuff like that in that kind
Yeah.
of in that kind of thing. So they had to keep pretty tight, their whole thing,
Hmm.
because if not, you can easily get pulled in some directions. So it was hard, and so this producer called Pepe called me. He's actually Lebanese, and
Wow.
he,
Hey.
yeah, I mean, he's never been to Lebanon, but he's Lebanese. And
Just
there's a
one of the
lot of
diaspora.
that in Mexico, yeah. And he was like, "Hey, what do you think if we work together on this? Let's go meet the Tigres." And we went to San Jose, California together to just introduce myself and to tell them the way I wanted to take the documentary and the story with respect, and how I saw it, how I related to their music was about migration. I worked a lot with the migration
Mhm.
issues and
Hmm.
forced displacement and all these kind of things in many places. So that's what talked to me about their music, and I know we took it from there, and it took a few years to finish it, but I don't know, we built a great relationship with them, and yeah, that was it. That was the movie.
It is a great story. And you also mentioned the three deaths of Marisela. Um,
Yeah,
that one was, first of all, that story is pretty wild. I mean,
yeah,
and that it's a factual documentary. Like, what's happening in that documentary is real. And 97% of femicides still happen in Mexico, and they don't get solved. And
yeah,
and the fact that you also mentioned in the end that every day 10 women are killed in Mexico for whether it's domestic abuse or whatever the crime is. That one definitely was way more intense and more emotionally driven. So how do you manage between, the contrast? Because it seems like you have a very wide range of when it comes down to making movies. How are you able to handle all of these different movies?
Well, I guess it has to do with how I relate to them. No, if I relate through them through indignation or rage,
Mm,
or just looking for justice, or just like with the Tigres, for example, or the Taco Chronicles,
mhm,
which was not my idea, but it did
mhm,
great. It was my
Yeah.
another producer's idea. It was
mhm,
genius, because it really like I've been in places like, for example, Vancouver, like 2 months ago, and a flight attendant, I don't know, she knew about the tacos. I think my friend was making a joke, and she's like, "I went to Mexico because of that show. I went because I wanted to taste the tacos there." So
mm,
it did
Wow.
really well. We actually shot
mhm.
a few scenes in LA because
Yeah,
it's kind of
definitely.
Mexico, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
I've been
that's
to,
true.
yeah, the Sonora Town's my favorite place
yeah,
for Mexican
exactly.
food. Totally, so good.
And after the show, they got another location. Like it did really well. And
Mhm,
I guess I connect to the stories in different levels, and as long as I care, I'm gonna give it my all, because documentary filmmaking is
Hmm.
not like sometimes fiction that it's so much money around, and
mhm,
and I don't know, you have to be driven by some other thing that just your work. And Marisela was very, very personal because I was working in Chihuahua. At the
mhm,
time, I knew the story because even though it was a very well known story in Mexico, I didn't know it. I got to meet her lawyers when she was alive, and I was working with them doing some pro bono work around, gender based violence. And
mhm,
they introduced me to the story, to the files, to all what happened. And I was so upset, when I heard about the story. I was thinking about my own sisters. I was like,
Hmm.
what would I do, if my sisters disappeared one day? Like, would I have the balls to do what Marisela and her family did? Would I stay quiet? Would I just let it go? Would I kill myself? Like all these things cross your mind.
mhm.
And that's how it came to be, because it took 5 years to make that movie. Netflix got involved, for the last two.
Wow.
And yeah, and the Tigres is just another thing. Like for me, was dignifying, migration. Like Mexicans have been, looked down upon, like
Yeah.
humiliated because of migration to the US. And I think what the Tigres did was just dignify that, and dignify the path, dignified with the music. And I think that if the Tigres were singing what they were singing like 20, 30 years ago now with, Instagram, and they would be like worldwide, honestly. Like their music is so powerful. It speaks truth, it's brave, it spoke against the US when it wasn't so easy, to speak your mind.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's how I relate to the projects. Even though they're very different, I think they have the same thing in common with it just social justice,
Yeah.
Can I ask, what do you think the role of a documentarian is? Is it to be a neutral observer, like fly on the wall, or are you hoping for like more activism or more justice to come from your documentary work?
That's a great question, and that's something I talk a lot about with colleagues, because even though we aim for objectivity and stuff like that, yeah, I think it's impossible, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
the bias of your view all the time. And I do think that each director or producer is different. Like in my case, I do aim for some kind of change, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
with time, you start realizing that it's very small what you can do. I think we
Mm-hmm.
all start with, thoughts of greatness that we can actually change the system, or for people to stop killing women, because they saw a documentary, which is unrealistic. But um, I, I think it's different, I think also I think a lot of filmmakers that put a lot of themselves in the films, and I think that's a choice
Mm.
So I don't know. For in my case, I try to balance it a lot. Like for example, I just put out a series last year about a massacre that happened up north in Chihuahua with a Mexican American Mormon family called the Levarons,
Mm.
Los Levaron.
Mhm.
And there's an episode in there, the episode 3, which talks about the land and water disputes, between the Levarons and other communities. And some of the guys of the other communities are my friends. I know them for a long time. They are farmers in there, like they're good people. They just live in a very fucked up state with not no laws and a lot of corruption. And whoever is the richest will dig deeper, for water. So there has been now like fights, like gun fights, because of this kind of shit. Because the
Oof.
government doesn't really get in and gets the water even to all of the people. So I think I went there as objective as I could, giving voice to both parts and understanding the big issue that is water and what's going to happen. And they all got mad at me. Like no one liked that episode because they were not speaking to their side. And I was trying
Mm.
to be as fair as I could, even though my own biases of what I think it's right,
Mm-hmm.
whose the land is, who the water belongs to. Like, honestly, that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is facts and what's going on the ground. So in that case, I think we can pull ourselves apart. But sometimes, like, yeah, people are not going to take it the right way because facts are facts. And yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it depends a lot on who's making the film and what the
Mm-hmm.
topic is and the positionality of the filmmaker in the issue. I think it's different.
So would you say that you would prefer objectivity in most cases, or in the certain cases like the one that you just mentioned, would you be more leaning towards possible maybe in the future to kind of actually show more of a subjective view instead? Maybe it wouldn't be necessarily a documentary in that case because it's more of your subjective view, but in a sense, it sounds a bit complicated, I know, but maybe that's something that you also think about, like if you want to, if you're wrestling with these emotions about whether wanting to be a
Yeah.
more subjective perspective. Like, do you ever consider just taking a side and saying like this is the correct side?
On some issues, I would say so, but like I would strive for objectivity all the time because I think that's more useful for society. Like my my job would be like doing the most thorough investigation that I could, and the facts speaks for themselves. Like, because
Hmm.
my opinion at the end of the day, I mean, of course, it's on the topic that I choose to develop, on, on,
Mm-hmm.
on, on the sides of the victims and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, my opinion, I don't think it matters a lot. I think that what we need more than ever in media is just like unbiased, like factual, information, because everything is just so manipulated that it makes me so confused, here in Mexico, like, I mean, you have to really dig deep to get, the information, even though you're on the same side, you're in your comfort zone of information, with my, este, like politically minded, like same minded people. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm starting to feel very uncomfortable with that, because I feel that I'm not getting the full information that I need to be, to complain, to make my own mind about issues. And I do think that my work has to be like that, and my work, I mean, as a director, because there's so many people in the teams, that we work with. It's hundreds of people sometimes, and I mean, and the
Really?
creative team would be like 5, 6 people, that between the
Wow.
photographer, editor, it's the producer, AD.
Mm.
So the smaller core, they all have a say, and they all have an opinion, and even though we are like-minded people, we do have responsibility between all of us. So I would say objectivity. I mean, on issues that I think that are just uh, undeniably, yeah, like one-sided. If I choose to go towards that, I would do it, but because I'm convinced with the information that that's the right way to go.
The reason why I brought this up is because when we were watching, for example, the three deaths of Marisela, I was discussing with Ali, like when the first ruling came out that he was
Yeah,
acquitted of the murder. I mean, and they said because the confession could have been under coercion, blah blah
yeah,
blah. Okay, basically law jargon because they wanted to be as objective as possible. That's
yeah,
understandable. But like it was, even though there was no murder weapon found, and they couldn't 100% say that it was him. It was very obvious it was him. He even admitted it, and he was even in like his final statement. He said, "Is like yes, I'll take it," and that they still acquitted him. In those cases, maybe like I was telling Ali, like had the judges just considered like if they made a subjective decision, maybe just a small one in their final ruling,
yeah,
maybe this whole case wouldn't have happened. Maybe Marcella wouldn't have died. Maybe like this whole situation for her would have not happened, and Ruby would have gotten justice.
yeah,
But at the same time, obviously, had that not happened, maybe we wouldn't even be talking to you right now about it, and we
yeah,
wouldn't have had made a documentary. So like, there's
yeah.
multiple things to think about, I guess.
No,
Um,
that's yeah. Sorry.
no, go ahead. I just want to say I don't have a question. I just wanted to hear your perspective on this.
No, but that's an excellent example, because what
Mhm.
happened there is that the judges were following technically to the letter, the law,
Mhm.
Yeah.
because of all of these things, like you were saying, like if Sergio uh, frames himself, I'm sorry about the English. Sometimes the
You're
terms I don't
good.
get them right.
Confession.
Like
Yeah,
No, hey, go
if he
confess.
first.
confesses, it doesn't count
Mhm.
because of the whole coercion thing and stuff like
Yep.
that. Because no
Yeah.
one was a direct witness, it doesn't count. Like they were doing the right thing, I guess,
Yep.
technically because of the moment politically of
Hmm.
the justice system just changed in that year to make oral things. So they were watched a lot, and they kind of didn't give a shit. That's the truth. They were just like,
Mhm.
it's another case. Like they never thought it was going to explode like this with Marisela. And it was Juarez, in 2010. It was the most dangerous city in the world. I mean,
Mhm.
it was tough. And
Yeah.
in that aspect, because I saw that, with the file and everything that I knew from the lawyers, I saw that, I saw that maybe it was a little unfair to the judges, because I think they fucked up. I do think so. But at the same time, I wanted them to talk about it, to say things how they are, because I think they deserve, to have a say in this. So I begged
Mhm.
them to be in the documentary. I wrote them letters. I was gonna meet both of them. Both of them stood me up like at 6 a.m. in a restaurant, in a diner, and I was like, I cannot defend you. You need to be in the documentary because this doesn't look good for you. Like this had a lot of backlash, and one of them told me like, I cannot put myself through this again because of the feminist groups. That's what he told me. Yeah?
Mhm.
Not judgment here from me.
Oh.
That's what he said.
Mhm.
And I understood that. So it's very complicated sometimes, as much as we want, to make a fair assessment of it and also have like a shocking, sequence, because that was, the first death, that was really shocking. I mean, having
Mhm.
them explain exactly what happened doesn't take out the fact of what happened, after that. But to answer your question, Said, if they have just used a little bit of personal, judgment there, you're right. Marisela would be with us today, and that's the truth. It's and with documentary, I think it's kind of the same. You're right. We cannot be objective enough. Like I choose who I give the microphone to. I choose how to edit things.
Mhm.
Um, and that's you have to trust yourself that you're not endangering anyone or just making a personal observation that doesn't really fit, like I had situations where, for example, I did another documentary called The Darkness Within the Light of the World, which is about the church in Guadalajara. And like at one point, one of the interviewees from the church, like he messed up with his interview. He said something he shouldn't have said, you know. and it was very incendiary, but it wasn't true. Like it wasn't true. He was just like, it was a weird situation where for the documentary it was great, because he would just put a sequence in, like the end of the sequence would be like, wow, he really said this. And he talked to me and he was like, hey, Carlos, I don't feel comfortable with this. I think I messed up. I was confused. And I was like, yeah, don't worry. I'm not going to use that, because even though it's great for the documentary, I think in the long run, it's not helpful. It's not helpful to stigmatize further this community that honestly, most of them have no idea what's going on with the apostles and the abuse and all that stuff. So I think we do have to use common sense both ways, and personal judgment.
Hmm. There's a lot of responsibility in documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, I
Right?
think so.
Hmm.
How do you take into account all of this responsibility? Like, how do you hold yourself accountable when dealing with these issues?
Um, hmm, just do hard work, I guess. For me, I mean, for a while, I don't know, like 10 years ago, it was hard for me sometimes to separate myself from situations that the subjects were having. No, in different films, not these big films, just like shorter things that I used to do pro bono for NGOs and stuff like that. Like it really messed me up,
Uh-huh.
So I understood that the only thing that I could make myself accountable and just feel good about myself, after dealing with a lot of things and with subjects and put their testimonies out there, was just
Yeah.
first to speak clearly about my intentions, about what I can deliver, what I can't deliver, because I fucked up in the past, and because I was so excited, sometimes I would say, yeah, this is gonna be go to film festivals and go into, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was being truthful because I really thought that, but I had no idea how to do it. So that was not good. And the other way I make myself accountable is just working really hard on the research,
Hmm.
and that I get my facts right and I get my interviews right, and I get a lot of contact with the victims of cases and just ask them a lot what they want, what they don't want, showing them their films before they air, stuff like that. That's how. I mean, it's impossible to make everything at their people's likings, but so far, I think I have a really good relationship with all the subjects of the documentaries.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
So you're taking more of a journalistic approach too. Like you're doing a lot of the
Yeah,
research and investigation and putting together the pieces as well as filming the documentary. That's a lot of work for each documentary. And
yeah,
it sounds like you're also working on multiple documentaries at the same time, because if each
yeah,
documentary is taking you years to make,
yeah,
are you working on different projects at the same time?
yeah. I mean, about the research, I mean, I do have teams, really,
Oh,
really
I
good
see.
teams of researchers that I've learned a
Hmm.
lot from, and I try to work with them all the time because they are the real deal, like they care,
Hmm.
they're amazing, they're thorough, like they're so good. And yeah, I work simultaneously in different projects. We have to, right? Because I have to make get paid, to live. And because in documentary you cannot focus on one thing for a long time, there is not enough budget for it to be sustained. And also, I mean, it's the work I love, so I don't know, Tigres and La Luz del Mundo I did like on parallel, basically. This series that I put up last year, I was doing with like two films. I think I do some kind of pro bono work for some NGOs sometimes. So I'm working on things that don't get a lot of views, but
Hmm.
they I like doing them. And now I'm working on two things at the same time. I'm working for a series for Max for HBO, like
Nice.
on a developing
Nice.
stage.
Hmm.
So it's more like desk research, like stuff like that. And I'm
Hmm.
finishing filming like my fourth feature, which is called Death. I mean, it's Muerta o en la cárcel in English. We don't know the title, but it's kind of Death or in Jail,
Hmm.
which
Okay.
talks
Yeah.
about women that survived attacks, killing their aggressors. and they are put in jail because of that. Like
Mm-hmm.
defending themselves.
Wow,
So it's kind of what happens after. Who survives, and that I'm finishing. I'm starting editing.
that's amazing. Can't wait to see that one.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, me too,
So
because I have no idea.
How long does it take to edit a documentary like that?
I mean, we have a very short calendar here because the money is short, right? Because
I see.
we 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 got there's a thing here in Mexico called Eficine, which is like
Hmm.
how do I say it? It's like taxing exemptions, for
Yeah.
companies that instead of paying the
Hmm.
tax, they give it to culture. In this case,
Hmm.
cinema. I mean, you get money, but it would be like half of the budget for like a Netflix film. So we really need to be creative about some stuff, and like a Netflix documentary I can edit in a year. This one I have to do in 6 months.
okay.
Yeah,
Wow. Just financing, and it's so cool that nowadays documentaries have become a lot more popular and a lot more people watch a lot more documentaries. I remember when
yeah,
I was younger, watching a documentary was a lot more rare, and then
yeah,
it was very niche, and only a few people, more nerdy people would watch documentaries. But nowadays, I think documentaries are everywhere on every streaming channel, and they're so much more fun to watch. And even Sad was telling me yesterday how much fun it is to watch your documentaries, and um,
thanks, man.
it's such
Anytime. Yeah.
it's. Have you noticed a change, the culture around documentaries and how people consume them?
No, I think so. I mean, the Three Deaths of Marisela Escobedo was the first original documentary long feature in Mexico. So it's just been 5 years since
Wow.
then. The industry is really young. I do think we have a long way ahead because now I think documentaries and I have a fault in here too, have been just like true crime is what people think about documentaries, as an audience.
Yeah.
And there's
I was
such a big world of documentaries out there, yeah.
I
But
was
you like
actually
doing
thinking about
them.
the same thing. Well, like for example, with
Hmm.
the Jeffrey Dahmer one, I think that one just kind of really blasted
Yeah.
documentaries into the limelight.
Yeah, I think we need to what has to happen is that we need to separate also documentaries into genres, right? Because
Mm.
we put
Yeah.
everything about documentary in the same basket. It's not like fiction, that you have your dramas, your comedies, your stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I
Interesting.
do think that we need to separate them because true crime is a genre of its own, and it's interesting and it has
Yeah.
many ways to looking at it. But there's a lot of documentaries that are more fun, like comedic or profound, or family or dramatic, not in the sense of crime. So I think we're getting there. I think that just audiences have to ask for more type of documentaries, and platforms have to, risk a little bit more. And I don't think that Netflix Latin America does it. I don't know if the other platforms really want to take a risk because it takes an investment, to have a years of documentaries, and then, like audiences will start watching because, for example, Netflix Latin America buys a lot of great documentaries,
Hmm.
like from all over the world. They have a great catalog, and I don't think they're very popular. You know what I mean? But if you
Mm.
dig there, you have like jewels, like gold in there.
So many films, and you're getting entertained and educated at the same time. That's what I
It's
love the most
amazing.
about documentaries. Yeah, totally. And you get to empathize and look into a world and learn something about people. Like from your films, I've learned a lot about the culture of Mexico. It also helped me understand a bit why people would choose to immigrate as well too, from
Yeah.
more dangerous neighborhoods to less dangerous ones, because if you are in a neighborhood where you're not getting any justice and there's a lot of violence and you're worried
Yeah.
about your daughter, ending up being murdered, I would totally understand um, how you would want to move somewhere else, and that explains a lot. And a lot of times in terms of immigration, people, are very not understanding, or they don't can't empathize with others, or they think of them as other completely different people. But watching a documentary like yours helps us connect with them and see them as people just like you and me, and ask questions like, what would you do if you were in their situation?
Yeah, for me, I think that's what documentaries are, like just look into someone else's reality and connect it with yours. Because I do think that uh, our similarities are more powerful than our differences, and
Yes.
that's exactly right. The Tigres, and also, how you portray them, because I think the Tigres make a really dignified, portrait of the migrant, and if you see the
Mm-hmm.
Tigres del Norte, you're like, migrants are the shit, like, look at these little boys. So the next little boys you see singing on the street, asking for dimes or nickels, you're like, these might be the next Tigres del Norte. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like it has to do with
Yeah.
representation as well, because I remember I was working in Lebanon once with the
Mm-hmm.
UNICEF, and
Mm-hmm.
I was doing a project. I went to teach photography to Palestinian kids in the camps. In Lebanon they have like
Mm-hmm.
12, 14 different camps. So I had students from
Yeah.
all the camps, and they would take them to Beirut once every 2 weeks, and I would go to their houses like two times, I think, per student, because they were all over, in all the regions in Lebanon. And I was doing like a short film. It was a different thing, like shorter,
Mm-hmm.
lower budget, like short films, for the UNRWA, and we put out a book with the students' work. And at one time, I have a discussion with the director of the UNICEF I mean, the agency that he was a Spaniard, and he was in Spain, I think. And I have a discussion with him because he was like, why is this kid wearing Nike shoes? It's like, because he has Nike shoes. Like, what do you want me to take them out and take a picture? And he's like, yeah. And he was like, we're not going to get any attention with this. And I was like, what do you want? You want a Palestinian kid that looks like what? Like a homeless kid? Like, what is your idea? Like, this is the kid, these are the kids I teach, which are normal teenagers, like my sister at that time, like my, cousins and stuff like that. And I think that's more appealing, because you can see yourself in there. You can see your family in there, instead of just
Mm-hmm.
looking at the same fucking one-time story that you're told, about poverty and migration, and displacement. And that
Yeah.
for me is just not useful. So I was like, I'm not gonna change this shit. I'm not gonna ask him to wear anything else or look for someone else. He's my student, and he's wild and he's great. And now I think he's in Dubai, I think, working. And I mean, because of all the struggles Palestinians have in Lebanon because of the
Mm-hmm.
passport and shit like that, a lot of these students managed to do some great stuff. Actually, one of my students back then, she's in Mexico now. She speaks
Wow.
fluent Spanish. She's Palestinian Syrian. She is an amazing, smart. She's gonna be a filmmaker and a journalist. And imagine, the worldview this girl has. She's
Right.
23, I think, and she's brilliant. You know, and if this kind of things, this kind of communication doesn't get out there, like the one story is gonna, keep going and dehumanizing, people in need of something else. So I forgot the question, but it had to do with representation, I guess. No.
Yes. No. True.
You're making a good point about the
Mm-hmm.
representation part because it's it is unfortunate that when they're making these like advertisements for kind of to support people in the Middle East, you always have that
Yeah.
same image, and they're just like, really poor and rags and like living in
Yeah.
tents. Um, there's a partial truth to it, but at the same time, I think when you constantly project that kind of image about, for example, Palestinian people or whoever in the Middle East is suffering, then you, in a sense, dehumanize them or kind of represent them as like, in a sense, a lower level type of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the image that maybe people in the West do have of Palestinians, which is a major issue in my opinion, because then when they do think about it, they don't think like these people. like these Palestinians are humans like us, they might not see
Yeah.
them as the same on the same level.
Yeah. No, for sure, and I think that at some point, the stories, someone took a camera, took pictures of someone, in a region, and they went global, and I do think that
Yeah.
a lot of photographers like myself, we admire that kind of photography, that kind of position they put themselves into in conflict and wanted to replicate that. But that passed on generations. When I went to Palestine to work, like I saw that, like the excitement, of course, of a journalist is to go to the Gaza Strip, to go to the
Mm-hmm.
front lines of the rocks and the fire and all that stuff, that it's very appealing photographically. But I do think
Mhm.
that's there, the spirit of resistance in the photography. I think we have it. We have amazing
Yeah.
pictures. I mean, we get the concept. But what I saw, I mean, the project I was doing there was with an Italian NGO. I mean, it was with UN Women, but it was about empowerment through economic packages, so that
Mm-hmm.
different women
Yeah.
could start their own businesses. It's not the front lines of war, but it's definitely the front lines of the society resistance, and economic resistance. So I took videos and pictures of women, putting their own small businesses, supporting themselves, because their partners were imprisoned by Israel, and they were just taking pictures of babies, and making themselves a business, that they could manage. So for me, that's resistance as well. But that's not portrayed, because if a lot of people in the West would see this amazing, like eloquent, smart, beautiful women doing that, like the perception would shift definitely, in different people's minds, because a lot of people commenting on this issue don't never been to Palestine, never been met a Palestinian from any region, because there's so much diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely what you get out of media, it's what sticks to your head and makes you care or not care. If it doesn't look like you, if it doesn't feel close to you, why are you going to care? You have enough problems in your life. So I do think that's super important side. Yes.
Wow.
Definitely agree. Relatability is important. That's just
Yeah.
another word I wanted
Yeah.
to add. Relatability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ali,
Yeah.
I didn't mean
Definitely.
to interrupt you.
And yeah, and documentaries and photography really can make you empathize and connect with people. I want to know, what's it like from your perspective working on human rights. So you're documenting a lot of things going on, a lot of injustices and human rights abuses. What kind of toll does that take on you as a documentary filmmaker? How do you process and deal with all the injustice that you see?
Um, well, it's I think I told you guys this before. Like a while ago, it, it took therapy, of course, to process like the worst the things that I saw. It had to do with famine
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. Like it took me a while to understand or to separate myself from that situations and to play out the guilt. Because it plays a part of this. For doing it and for not doing it, and to feel like you feel. I think that's something you need to separate, because if that disabilitates you, you're not good for the work, right? And also, if you stop caring, like you're not good for the work. Like you have to be in the middle spot. But at the same time, like these are not my life stories, and I have
Mhm. Yeah.
my own life story. I've been lucky enough not to go through the same things that the people that I document go through. And I think that how I stay centered in that balance is just try to make the best work that I can. And that, yeah, I think so. I'm nowadays, like, I get this question a lot. And also what I think is that the people that I document that do like activism in the front lines, or like I've talked to people that were, in the Ebola crisis, in Africa and stuff like that, those guys get really traumatized. Like, so I kind of document the people who do that, and I get a lot of the stories, but I need to just separate that from my life and just dignify it with the best work that I can do it. And now I think I'm at peace with that. Like I think it has to be, there has to be self-care definitely in our journalistic, documenting, activism, all of this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep an eye on that. But for me, it was just therapy and just understanding my place in it, because sometimes you feel guilty, right? And you're like, I'm taking these stories, and I'm making a living out of it, and it's a lot of suffering. And is this right? Is this not right? But then you see the results, and they really can't influence some things. Some things you do less. But I think if you do it, with the right heart, with the right intention, you can keep doing it, and being transparent. I think that's what keeps you grounded, I think, and sane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Can you share with us? Oh, go ahead, Ali.
I can tell your relationships with your characters from your documentary films. Like, you try to build these relationships with these people, and sometimes there's a lot of emotional moments in your documentaries and things that get very high stakes. Um, do they? What are those moments like? Do they ever tell you like to turn off the camera? Do you ever feel guilty about filming a moment like this, or is this something that you and your documentary subjects have built like trust on and an agreement? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a process that we do. I mean, talking about the main interviews, with the most affected victims in the film, we do have a process. Like, for example, we try to build a safe environment for them. Have the least people on set, no phones. I tell them constantly that, like, they are in control of that. Like, if they say something they don't want to be shown, like, I will take it out. That's in my control and their control, to have, so they don't feel anxious that I'm just gonna use it whatever
Mm-hmm.
way I want. I mean, but ultimately it's trust, because you never know what people tell you, but what I'm gonna tell them. And I had a case in the Luz del Mundo film, which I encounter a very fragile woman who was abused by the church leader since childhood, and because of that, she was exiled from her community, her family. She was in a very bad place. So when we met her, me and the producer Laura just understood that we were not the ones who had to call the shot if it was okay to do the interview, because for us it would be easy just to say, yeah, give us the interview, and that's it. So we put her through like therapy. Like, we had an NGO that did pro bono for us, and they determined with her that she wanted to do the interview, that she wanted to speak
Wow.
out against this guy, because
Uh-huh.
this guy
Yeah.
fucked up her life, and the life of many,
Mm-hmm.
many people inside the church. So she did that. She did the interview. She went to therapy. She did the interview. She was great. Like, she was very thankful, I think, for speaking out and for someone to hear her out and believe her. And we did a lot of research work around her. And she was great, but like, the months passed and she took her life, because the pain was so great of everything that was around
Oh
her
wow.
that she took her life. Yeah. And I flew to Guadalajara the next day, I think, with my producer, and we were just talking to the husband to say, like, hey, listen, we have the interview, but we don't want to use it if you are not don't agree with it, and he was like, no, this is what she wanted. This has nothing to do with it, like I'm like, I would have really wanted her to watch the documentary because it did really well, and it put that asshole in his place, I think, at least in the memory of a lot of people. So yeah, it's you have to design, interviews and stuff, depending on who you're interviewing, and always build, trust and comfort around it, because at the end of the day, no documentary is important enough, to like make someone suffer. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Definitely.
So yeah, it takes. I mean, depending on the subject, there's more delicate
Ouch.
things. I
Yeah.
mean,
For
when
sure.
it's an authority, I don't give a shit. Like when there's an authority present that has to, answer for, past negligence and shit like that. Go in, we ask the questions, we go out. That's it.
This makes me think of the No Other Land documentary and the abuses those filmmakers have gone
Yeah.
through. But for
Hmm.
them, maybe it was worth putting the film out there, even though that might put their own lives and their family lives at jeopardy. I mean, those guys are incredibly brave. Hmm.
I do. I mean, I don't know them, but I would risk to say that for them it's all worth it. Like even though they get like all this backlash, and I think the village was raided again, and he was is this like kidnapped again and everything. Like they made a statement. I mean, even though they haven't found, I think, distribution because of all the shit surrounding the narrative of the conflict. I mean,
Hmm.
like for example, I went with my girlfriend to watch the film. Of course, this is no news for a lot of us. Like what happened there in
Hmm.
the film.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, but it's like the day by day of the West Bank and Gaza, right? And
Hmm.
like my girlfriend, who I'm introducing to the stuff, she's from Venezuela, so
Hmm.
she has her own problems, you know. Um, she was I'm like she can't believe the things I tell her, And when we watched No Other Land, she was crying her eyes out. She was like, I didn't know the extent of these things, but that's what happens with documentary because you can hear, villages getting raided, it's the occupation, houses getting
Hmm.
bulldozed, but until you
Hmm.
see, the suffering, firsthand, and you can connect to it, then you start caring, and you're like, this shit is not, it's a no go, which is, I mean, in another topic, I didn't know the propaganda machine from it was that powerful till this thing started. It's
Yeah.
crazy that this is not just like everyone is just against it. For me, it's just unexplainable. It's just I didn't know it was that powerful.
It is insane. I mean, we interviewed a comedian, a Jewish comedian, on the podcast not too long ago, who was an ex-Zionist, and it took
Wow.
him to literally go through a torture experience, which was a part of like the hazing they do at the boot camps. So it was done by
Shit.
some of the IOF soldiers onto him, and it when they were doing the torture on him, they said that this is what we do to Palestinians, and that's when it clicked in his head like this is all bullshit. And since then, like he left the whole propaganda system. He even rebelled against his family, and but yeah, it's crazy that you have to have that kind of experience, to be able to relate to what Palestinians are going. Like for him to actually get out, he had to be tortured to see the reality. I mean,
Wow. Imagine that.
what yeah, I
Better
mean,
to
what,
see
what
a
does that say
film,
for the
no?
others?
It's better to watch a documentary.
Much easier, definitely. A question I did
Wow.
was thinking about was you said that you go to therapy because obviously encountering and reading and researching about all of these traumatic events and talking to these people who are going through these traumatic events, um, that you need a certain level of self-care. What are like three tips for self-care that that maybe you do that you would like to share? Could be useful to others.
Yeah, I think first is that asking for help it's okay, because sometimes I think
Mm,
we want to consider ourselves really tough and that we don't need that stuff, and we all need that stuff. That's the truth. No? Like first is just if you're feeling, that like bad about things, and you need to make things in your head fit in places, just ask for help. I mean, just go talk to someone. Like that helps a lot. I would say the second one would be like I mean, I know our work and everyone's work, right, feels like the most important thing in the world, and that you cannot mess up. And like, I think this is what a lot of my colleagues in documentary feel like, that the film they're making, the people they're giving voice to, the issue they're exploring is the most important thing, and that it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, even though mostly no one cares. Like, in reality,
Yeah.
it's a lot less than what you think. So just relax a little bit and enjoy what you're doing, because at the end of the day, if you're doing it for the right reasons, just enjoy it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
fine to enjoy your work, even though it's dealing with stuff like this, because documentary, it's a wild ride, but it's full of richness and people and amazing experiences. And if you miss, enjoying that, you will miss a lot. And I do think that for years I did that. I was just a lot in my head about how important, the work that I do, like my career, what was I gonna do? Like, I remember in 2015, I went to film in Nepal, and an earthquake hit, in the middle of the thing. And for me, it was
Yeah.
going to be my first film, and I needed to prove myself. And I was just consumed by it. And I didn't want to, go to gatherings with my friends, because I was, like writing and stuff like that. And years later, like the film, I didn't even finish it. Like, I couldn't find the budget. I couldn't find anything. I didn't know what I was doing. And I just lost a lot of, experiences. And I went through a lot of stress just thinking about how I was messing up. And that's just not worth it. At the end, just like,
Yeah.
I mean, you can do a film that wins an Oscar, and you don't get distribution, because you can't control anything, And yeah, I think that would be what I would say to other people doing documentary and stuff. I mean, I hope I have a long career ahead of me, and I'm still learning so much. Like, I always feel in the films, I'm like, "Yeah, I got this, like I've done this a few times, like, and then I go into the middle of film, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, this is crap. Like, what am I doing? And I think you never see, like, it never ends. You're always learning, and I think that
Mm.
attitude makes you enjoy more. Like, learn from anyone you have around you, because you will meet amazing people.
Yeah, that's true. And it's sometimes it feels as if those people are kind of like placed in front of you to
Yeah,
assist you. You know, I know it sounds like a bit of a spiritual comment, but it's kind of it just sometimes it just happens.
yeah,
And I don't know how the world configures itself for those kind of things to just magically occur in your life, but it's pretty cool when it does. And
yeah,
I think the most important part is just to not to really overthink it and just let it happen.
yeah. I mean, we call that the documentary gods sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, when things like that happens, just the documentary gods look down on us. Yeah,
Watching over and protecting you
Do
wherever
you
you
ever,
go.
yeah.
uh, speaking of gods, I know this is now a bit of a like a weird topic to randomly bring up, but like, what's your opinion on faith and where's your perspective on that?
Well, it's honestly, it's not. It changed a lot sometimes. It's weird, but it's just like you were saying. Like, I have dealt with stories in many faiths. In Hinduism, Buddhism,
Mm,
Islam, the Church of the Light of the World, which, it's like, I understand that the whole thing around it was made up by the apostle, who wanted power, and just one day woke up and said,
hmm
I talked to God, and like, they told me that you have to do this for me, and it passed on generations. But I do see the communities, and I do sometimes envy the faith, because me myself personally, I have no religion, right? Like, I don't consider myself
Yeah.
anything, maybe agnostic, because that's what the term that I rationalize and think I'm more close to. But I do see the religions around me, and I do envy the faith, the certainty of just thinking that things are going to be all right. I don't know. It's just, I do think, and I do want to think, for example, I always carry with myself, I don't have it right now, but I do carry a symbol of the Virgin of Guadalupe,
Mm-hmm.
because even though I'm not religious,
Mm.
I feel something, that connects me with my grandmothers and my ancestors, and it's just a symbol of my city, and I do kind of pray to it. It's weird, but I do feel
Mm.
spirituality, although I'm not a religious person, because I the more I see of the world, the more I see the miracles in it. And I know this is cliche and very corny, but I do see it, everywhere I go. And I just can't wrap my mind around something that just is like this because of that. I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but
Well,
for me it's just, yeah.
it does make sense, at least for me, because there are certain things that happen in your life where you don't have an explanation for it. You know,
Yeah.
most things you can rationalize them. You can say it's like, oh, this happened because of this. There's a direct correlation, yada yada yada,
Yeah.
whatever terms you wanna use. But then there are certain things like maybe it's just 10% of your life, or at most 20%, and you think back to it, and it's like, how the fuck did that happen?
Yeah.
Like how
Exactly.
it's like, where did this come from? Like, and I think those are the moments that really stick in your head that you always
Yeah.
remember. Like, as I'm talking about this, for some reason I don't know why, but my brain is taking me back to a memory that I had in school, where half of like I think this was like an extra class that we had, where half of the class kind of like ditched class because the teacher didn't come, and they
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
went to kind of like play around and you know have fun. I went out of the class a bit later, and as I was leaving the building, the supervisor caught me and told me, like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I kind of just stumbled, didn't know what to say. So she told me, "It's like, just go back to class. What are you doing?" So I was like, "Okay, sure." I just went back to class and just sat there doing nothing. And then later on, I found out that everyone else who ditched class earlier, all received detention for like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, something like that. I was like, what the fuck, man? It's a very small example, so random, but
Yeah, yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
you just think about it and you're like, what the fuck? I don't know if
Yeah.
you've had something like this that you want to share.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess in the when the earthquake happened in Nepal, I was. It was a long. It was 10 years ago, and it's gonna be ten
Mm,
years in 6 days.
Wow.
Um, I took some of my friends to film there from Mexico, and one of them is my best friend, I think, till today. We met when we were four, and he's also a filmmaker, and we went there to do pro bono work. And I don't know, you're full of adventure dreams. And when the earthquake happened, we were in an area where a lot of buildings fell down. I mean, Nepal has a weak infrastructure. It did a lot of damage.
yeah.
And like, honestly, I think I we for a moment we thought that a building was going to collapse on top of us. And it was it was it was like difficult. It was like buildings all over, like people, getting crushed by buildings very near us. And at that point, I was like, like we're human, right? Like we have built our society around stories and around, faith and around believing in something higher than us. And at that moment, I felt the need of that. I was hanging on to my friend because he's my, I love that guy, and I wanted him close to me, and we couldn't stand properly because of how the earth was
Wow.
shaking. I never experienced anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot stand, so you needed to do like a human change, to
Mm-hmm.
kind of that, and just wait to move around if something would collapse on you, because the buildings were like 4 or 5 stories high. They were not like big buildings. You don't have that in Nepal,
Mhm.
at least in Kathmandu. And like everything stopped, and we just went around trying to help what we could. We couldn't do a lot. And that, I felt like, I mean, we were very lucky, but at the same time, I was like, Thank you, Virgen Maria. Thank you so much for letting me live and my friend, because like fuck, like you understand how frail we are. Like I saw like people who died just from a brick over their heads, like a brick would just take part of your skull and you have an exposed brain. That's it. And there were people laying around like that. So like that nothing happened to us there. I thought it was kind of a miracle. I mean, you would like to think that because a lot of people survived, of course, but like I don't know, with spirituality I have a lot of respect. Like I learned a lot. Like even I had a girlfriend who's a Muslim. She's Palestinian Muslim, and she's like, if you want to take this further, you need to convert. And I was like, fine, yeah, let's do it. Like I just have a lot of respect, for traditions, for what brings people together. I mean, I have watched the most beautiful things in my life in the name of religion. That's the truth, the most beautiful projects. I mean, the worst things in the world, in the name of religion I've seen, but also the most beautiful things. So I have like a lot of respect, for spirituality. I think I live it in my own way. And I do think that doing documentary is kind of a miracle, like what brought me into this. I do think it was kind of, I'd like to think that, like you were saying, Said, like some choices that I didn't do and that people made for me put me in this path. And I'm just grateful for that shit,
Yeah.
Well said. My last question
That's an
today
amazing
is
answer, to be
about
honest.
the future of documentary filmmaking. What does that look like? Does artificial intelligence have a role in documentary filmmaking? What do you think?
No, I do. I think so. I think that documentary, I mean, I'm no expert. I'm just the guy that does documentary. I didn't even study film. Like I'm kind of self-taught at the beginning, and then I had a great teachers along the way. But
Like the Los Tigres.
yeah, like the Los Tigres. Exactly. Imagine those guys. Like, is that a life lesson or what? Right?
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
crazy. Yeah, like right now, for example, the film I'm making, Death or in Jail. I don't know. The title doesn't sound great in English, no? Death or in Jail. It sounds better in Spanish, I think. Or Death or in Prison.
Maybe keep it in Spanish. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, now it's like this. Look, like this is the poster we're doing for it. So it's
nice.
Muerte en la Cárcel. Fighting for your life is not a crime. And yeah, I'll tell you guys about it if you want to watch it. Pero like for example, I'm doing like sequences with fiction with this, because the story of this woman is so traumatic at some points that I think that the only way that I can achieve, making the people understand and go through put themselves in her shoes is just through fiction, like with an actress, with the real thing going on with like high-end production. And I think a lot of documentaries are just getting more creative, right? Because I think like before that you were saying, Ali, that a documentary felt like kind of boring and you just watch once in a while and it had to do with history and stuff like that, back then. Or what was visible on TV, because there's been amazing documentaries that they were not available for a lot of people. I do think that now it's shifting in more creative ways. Budgets are getting a little bit bigger, I think, for a lot of like famous filmmakers. And I do think that it's bright. I think that audiences really like feel pride in watching documentaries because, like you were saying, they teach us things. They make us, I think, more interesting. In our conversations that you can. Like if you watch No Other Land, you kind of know, what's going on in that part of the world, and you can comment about it, and maybe you can have a point of view about it, and it's a starting point for researching what's going on at the West Bank or Gaza. So I do think it's bright. I do think that the industry has to have faith in documentaries, and invest in them, and it has to do with patience and the audiences that really want in documentary. I do think that AI is going to have, I mean, it already does, for the things that I do. For example, the things that I have to edit because I don't have a budget. Like I use, for example, cleaning filters with AI for the audio. And it's amazing. Like I have like a lav mic, even though I'm doing a shotgun or my audio is not perfect,
Hmm.
with AI,
Yeah.
I can just clean it out. I called my friend as the sound
Wow.
recorder, and I was like, "You're kind of fucked. Like you need to learn. You need to learn a new skill because this shit is amazing. You know what I mean? Because
Oh man.
we will have to adapt. I mean, we
Yep.
can say it's right, it's wrong, but this will happen. And I use
Yeah.
ChatGPT every day, to work on research because it saves me 60% of time just talking to her and say, can you check this fact from 1995? What can you research? And it gives me uh, how do you say this? The
The references,
links,
Sources.
maybe.
the
The
Hmm.
references.
references, the
Yeah.
sources, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And although you cannot rely on this 100%, you can
Hmm.
start doing a lot of stuff. So I think it's going to improve our work, honestly,
Hmm.
because the
Hmm.
the things that take us more time, that they're tedious, we can concentrate more on the content and what really matters. We just need to adapt. I do think so. I hope I'm right, and I'm not out of work in like 2 years, and I'm gonna be like, guys, I messed up. Like, Virgencita, please help me.
Um, yeah. Hopefully, I don't think AI will be taking over the role of a director,
Right.
not anytime soon, at least. Especially with documentaries, because maybe with the editing, like you said, yeah, true.
Yeah.
But with the directing and like managing the emotions of what's being presented and what's you determining from your gut instinct that this is the right thing to show to people and this is what other humans would perceive as like something good to watch. I don't think AI has that ability to kind of relate with
Yeah.
other humans. I mean, they're just basing it
Yeah.
on facts and statistics, which isn't always accurate when it comes to you know getting the emotion from people.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. I hope so. Like this is going so fast, and it's crazy
Hmm.
how you can interact with ChatGPTs. It's crazy. Like I was showing my grandma the other day, and she could just wrap her mind around who she was talking to. She's 94, and
Oh
yeah,
wow.
let's see. I hope it's for the better. To better the stories, to make them more available for people, and yeah, I mean, it can also be used for the wrong reasons, for the right reasons. Let's see what the future holds. It's crazy. I'm excited for it, actually.
It is.
Definitely exciting.
Carlos, do you have any words of advice, final words of advice, or final words you want to end the podcast on?
No, just thank you guys. It's really cool to talk about these issues because I think they're important. In everything that we do as communicators. And the information we put out there. So I really appreciate you guys for giving this space, to talk about, positionality, representation, documentary filmmaking, self care. I think it's really important. And it's a pleasure, guys.
Thank you, Carlos, for coming on to the podcast, and thank you for your time. Guys, thank you for watching another episode of A to the Show. We're done, and peace.